Isabella Reed had always been a woman who thrived on competition. Ever since she was a child, she had felt an unspoken rivalry with her best friend, Victoria Hayes. From academics to sports, from social status to careers, they had competed in every imaginable way. It wasn't outright hostility, at least not on the surface, but an intense, silent battle waged beneath their smiles. To the world, they were the best of friends, inseparable and supportive. But beneath the surface lay the undeniable need to outdo one another. Their rivalry didn't wane with time. Even in adulthood, even in marriage, it followed them like a shadow. Isabella had married Nathan Reed, a well-respected financial consultant, while Victoria had tied the knot with Daniel Hayes, a charismatic lawyer who had an almost magnetic charm. While Isabella and Nathan had a marriage that seemed stable and respectful, Victoria and Daniel had the kind of passionate relationship that turned heads. Public displays of affection, whispered laughter in the corners of rooms, a connection that others admired and envied. And that was precisely what gnawed Isabella. Victoria had always had the upper hand in some way, always won in ways that mattered. No matter how successful Isabella was, Victoria found a way to shine just a little brighter. The final straw came at one of Victoria's infamous dinner parties. Their house was grander, their decor finer, their guests more refined. Daniel, ever the charmer, played the perfect host, his easy laughter filling the room, his hand lingering on Victoria's waist just a moment too long as he leaned in to whisper something that made her smile like a lovesick teenager. It was all too perfect, too flawless, too much. Isabella watched them with narrowed eyes as Nathan, ever practical and uninterested in social charades, sat beside her discussing market trends with another guest. He was a good husband, a reliable man, but not exciting, not like Daniel. And that was when it began. An idea, a dangerous one, took root in her mind. If Victoria always had to win, if Victoria always had to have the best, then perhaps it was time for Isabella to take something that belonged to her. It started with a text, a simple, harmless text to Daniel, thanking him for hosting such a lovely evening. He responded immediately, warm and charming as always. One message turned into 2, then 3, then daily conversations. It was easy, effortless. They talked about work, about life, about trivial things. It was innocent enough, at first, but Isabella knew better. She knew herself. She wasn't doing this just to chat. Daniel was quick to flirt, but in a way that never crossed the line into overt impropriety. He was a man who knew how to walk the tightrope of charm and respectability, and that only made it worse. He was the kind of man who made a woman feel seen, feel wanted. And Isabella had never wanted anything more than she wanted to take him from Victoria. Their first meeting alone was orchestrated carefully. It wasn't difficult. Daniel had an office downtown, not far from where Isabella often went for lunch. It was easy to suggest a casual meetup, just friends, just catching up. But when she arrived, dressed in a fitted blouse and pencil skirt that accentuated all the right curves, she knew what she was doing. And so did he. "You look stunning, as always," Daniel said with that effortless charm as he pulled out a chair for her. Isabella smiled, tilting her head slightly. "You're just saying that because you're used to Victoria outshining me." Daniel laughed, a deep, rich sound that sent a thrill through her. Now, you know I'd never compare." "But you do." Her eyes met his, unflinching. "Everyone does." There was a pause, a charged silence that thickened the air between them. "Is that what this is about?" he asked, voice lower now. "You and Victoria?" Isabella leaned in slightly, her fingers brushing his wrist ever so lightly. "Maybe," she admitted. "Or maybe I just wanted to see if you look at me the way you look at her." Daniel exhaled slowly, his eyes darkening with something unreadable. Isabella. She reached for her glass of wine, taking a slow sip, never breaking eye contact. Don't tell me you haven't thought about it. Daniel said nothing for a long moment. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair, a small, knowing smile playing at his lips. You're dangerous, he murmured, and Isabella knew then that she had one. Their affair didn't happen overnight, but it didn't take long either. The tension between them was electric, inevitable. It was stolen moments, lingering touches, whispers in the dark. It was thrilling in a way that Isabella hadn't felt in years. Every time they met, every time they indulged in their secret, it felt like another victory. Victoria, who had always had everything, would never see this coming, and that made it all the sweeter. But Isabella knew one thing for certain. Secrets this dangerous never stayed hidden forever. And when the truth came to light, the cost of her victory might be more than she ever anticipated. Isabella had always been meticulous, precise in her actions, but the thrill of her affair with Daniel had begun to consume her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The secrecy, the stolen glances, the hurried whispers in the dark, it all exhilarated her, but it also chipped away at the careful life she had built with Nathan. Lies, she realized, had a way of breeding more lies. It had started so simply, a lunch here, a late-night message there. But as the affair deepened, so did the need for deception. The careful web she wove had to be maintained with precision, each thread placed delicately to avoid unraveling her life. And yet, cracks were beginning to show. Nathan was nothing if not observant. Though he wasn't the type to pry or interrogate, Isabella sensed his suspicion growing. It was in the way he would glance at her phone when it buzzed late at night, the way he'd ask, ever so casually, about her lunch meetings. And then there was Victoria, sharp, intuitive Victoria, who had an uncanny ability to sense even the slightest disturbance in the atmosphere. One evening, as Isabella arrived home later than usual, she found Nathan sitting in the living room, his laptop closed, his expression unreadable. "Long day?" he asked, his voice neutral. She nodded, setting her purse down, her heart pounding slightly. "Yeah, work was hectic. I grabbed dinner with a client." Nathan didn't respond immediately, only studied her for a moment too long before nodding. "You've been working late a lot lately." She forced a casual smile. "You know how it is." "Do I?" he mused, his tone light but laced with something deeper. She busied herself with pouring a glass of wine, hoping the conversation would drift away. But she knew this was only the beginning. Meanwhile, Daniel was facing his own complications. Unlike Isabella, who was skilled at masking her emotions, Daniel was more impulsive, more reckless. He found himself texting her at odd hours, craving her presence more than was wise. Victoria had noticed. "Who's been keeping you so entertained lately?" she asked one evening as they sat in their lavish living room, sipping wine. Daniel, caught off guard, chuckled. "Just work stuff." She tilted her head, her sharp eyes scanning him. "Work stuff? At midnight?" He exhaled, attempting to appear casual. "You know how cases can be. Clients get anxious." Victoria nodded slowly, but he knew better than to assume she believed him. As the days passed, the affair grew riskier. The rush of secrecy was intoxicating, but Isabella was beginning to feel the weight of what she had set in motion. She told herself she was in control, that she could keep the walls of her deception intact. But deep down, she knew better. All it would take was one mistake, one misplaced message, one moment of carelessness, and everything would come crashing down. The thrill of deception had become a double-edged sword. Isabella had thought she could balance it, could keep her affair with Daniel hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed lies. But as the days turned into weeks, and the stolen moments between them became more frequent. The weight of their betrayal pressed down on her more heavily than ever before. She wasn't naive. She knew that Nathan's suspicions had only grown. He watched her with careful eyes, silent but aware. He never confronted her outright, but there was an unspoken tension in the air, like an approaching storm waiting to break. It made her cautious, but not enough to stop. And then there was Victoria. Victoria had never been the type to ignore her instincts. She was perceptive, always attuned to the slightest shifts in those around her. It was only a matter of time before she began to notice the lingering glances, the way Daniel seemed to be elsewhere even when he was in the same room with her. It started small, innocuous comments here and there. "Daniel, you've been glued to your phone lately. I had lunch downtown today," Victoria mentioned casually one evening. "I thought I saw you there, Isabella, but when I looked again, you were gone." The subtle probing sent waves of panic through Isabella, but she never let it show. She smiled. She laughed. She played the role of the devoted friend and wife. But the truth was creeping ever closer. One afternoon, Isabella and Daniel met in a secluded corner of a boutique hotel just outside the city. It was one of the few places where they could be together without the risk of running into someone they knew. She had thought it was safe, until she spotted Victoria's car parked across the street. Her heart pounded as she peered through the blinds. She had only caught a glimpse, and it could have been a coincidence. Victoria could have been anywhere, seeing anyone, but she knew better. She turned to Daniel, panic flashing in her eyes. "I think she saw us." Daniel frowned, moving to the window. "Are you sure?" "No, but I can't take that risk." She hurriedly grabbed her coat. "I need to leave. Now." Daniel caught her arm. "We can't keep doing this if you're going to panic every time." She shook him off. "This isn't just some game, Daniel. If she knows, if Nathan knows." His jaw tightened. "Then what? What are you going to do?" Isabella didn't answer. Instead, she fled, slipping out the back entrance and into the cold evening air. Victoria was waiting for her the next day. The moment Isabella stepped into the cafe where they had arranged to meet, she knew something was wrong. Victoria's expression was unreadable, her lips set in a firm line as she stirred her coffee with slow, deliberate movements. "Isabella," she greeted, her voice calm, too calm. Isabella forced a smile, sitting down across from her. "You sounded urgent. What's going on?" Victoria's eyes locked onto hers. "I saw you yesterday." The words sent a chill down Isabella's spine. She kept her composure, tilting her head slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Victoria continued, "I saw you at that hotel, and I saw Daniel go in right after you." Silence stretched between them. Isabella's mind raced. She could deny it. She could make an excuse, twist the truth the way she always had. But something in Victoria's gaze told her it wouldn't work this time. So she did the only thing she could. She lied with confidence. "I was meeting a client," she said smoothly. "Daniel must have been there for his own reasons." Victoria watched her, her fingers tapping against the porcelain of her cup. "Is that so?" "Yes." Isabella held her gaze. "Is there something you're trying to imply?" Victoria studied her for a moment longer before finally leaning back. "No, just making sure." But Isabella knew that wasn't the end of it. Victoria wasn't just making sure. She was warning her. When Isabella returned home that evening, Nathan was waiting. He stood in the kitchen, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said simply. And just like that, she knew. The unraveling had begun. The moment Isabella stepped into the house, she sensed the shift in the air. Nathan stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said, his voice firm but eerily calm. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to appear composed. She walked to the counter, setting down her purse, as if prolonging the inevitable would somehow lessen its impact. "About what?" she asked lightly, though her throat felt tight. Nathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her, his gaze unflinching. "Are you having an affair?" A silence heavier than any before stretched between them. Isabella's mind raced for a way out, an escape route carefully woven with half-truths and deflections. But something in Nathan's eyes told her he wouldn't accept anything but the truth. She forced a frown. "What? Nathan, that's ridiculous." "Is it?" His tone remained unsettlingly even. "Because you've been distant. You come home late, you avoid my questions, and you're always on edge." "I've been busy," she countered, keeping her voice steady. "Work has been demanding." Nathan exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I had a feeling you'd say that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. A few taps later, he held it up for her to see. Isabella's heart stopped. On the screen was a photo, grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. She and Daniel, leaving the boutique hotel. Her blood ran cold. "Care to explain this?" Nathan asked, his voice laced with quiet devastation. Isabella struggled to breathe. She could deny it, spin another lie, but would he believe her? Could she even believe herself anymore? She met his gaze, her mouth opening, but no words came. Nathan's expression hardened. "I thought we had something real, Isabella. Was I wrong?" A lump formed in her throat. She wanted to say something, anything, but the truth had finally caught up to her, and there was no running from it now. Meanwhile, Daniel faced his own reckoning. Victoria stood in their bedroom, arms crossed, her face set in cold fury. "Tell me the truth, Daniel." Daniel swallowed hard. He had always been a smooth talker, always known how to maneuver around confrontation. But this was different. "I don't know what you mean," he said, though the words felt weak even to himself. Victoria let out a bitter laugh. "Don't insult me." "I know." Daniel's jaw tensed. "Know what?" Her eyes darkened. "That you've been sleeping with Isabella." The words slammed into him like a punch. For a brief moment, he considered continuing the charade, denying it until she gave up. But he saw the finality in her gaze. She wasn't asking. She was telling him what she already knew. "How long?" she asked. He looked away. "It doesn't matter." Victoria's hands curled into fists. "It matters to me," Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "A few months." Her breath hitched, but she didn't cry. "I trusted you," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Daniel had no words of comfort to offer. He had done this. He had ruined this. And now, there was nothing left but the consequences. That night, Isabella sat alone in the dimly lit bedroom she had shared with Nathan for years. He had left, taking his car, his suitcase, and, most painfully, his trust in her. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Did he find out? She stared at the screen, fingers trembling over the keyboard. Then, finally, she typed back, "Yes, it's over." And just like that, the web of lies they had built came crashing down around them. The silence in Isabella's house was suffocating. Nathan's absence left a void she hadn't anticipated. She had imagined fights, tears, even begging. But instead, he had simply packed his bags and walked away, leaving her to sit in the wreckage of her choices. She hadn't tried to stop him. What could she have said? That it didn't mean anything? That she regretted it? None of those words would have undone what she had done. The house felt different now, emptier, colder. She wandered through the rooms, trailing her fingers along the walls, wondering if this was what she had truly wanted. The thrill was gone. The rush of secrecy, the adrenaline of betrayal. It had all been replaced with a crushing emptiness. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "I need to see you." She stared at the screen, hesitating. She had once longed for these messages, craved his attention. Now, she wasn't sure what she wanted. Still, she typed back, "Meet me at our usual place." Daniel was already waiting when she arrived. He looked just as drained as she felt. His shirt was wrinkled, his jaw unshaven, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. "She knows," he said as soon as she sat down. "So does Nathan," Isabella murmured. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling heavily. "Victoria kicked me out." Isabella swallowed. "Nathan left, too." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their choices pressing down on them. "What do we do now?" he finally asked. Isabella shook her head. "I don't know." The truth was, she had no idea where to go from here. The affair had been their escape, their twisted game of one-upmanship against Victoria. But now, without the secrecy, without the thrill, it felt hollow. "Do we?" Daniel hesitated, looking at her. "Do we stay together?" She looked at him, really looked at him. He had been exciting, dangerous, forbidden, but was he what she truly wanted? Or had he just been a means to an end? "I don't think we should," she admitted. A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, but he nodded. "Maybe you're right." For the first time since the affair began, Isabella felt something unexpected, relief. The days that followed were long and quiet. She avoided Victoria, unsure of what to say. When she finally saw her, it wasn't by choice. Victoria stood outside her office building, arms crossed, waiting. "We need to talk," she said, her voice sharp. Isabella steeled herself. "I don't think there's anything left to say." Victoria let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, there's plenty to say." Isabella sighed, rubbing her temple. "Then say it." Victoria's expression hardened. Was it worth it? Ruining everything just to win? Isabella hesitated. The answer wasn't as simple as she wanted it to be. "I don't know," she admitted. Victoria scoffed. "Well, I hope you enjoy your victory, Isabella, because you've lost far more than you've won." She turned and walked away, leaving Isabella standing there, feeling more defeated than ever. Months passed. Nathan never came back. He filed for divorce quietly, without fanfare, and she didn't fight it. Daniel moved on, leaving town in search of a fresh start. And Victoria? She never spoke to Isabella again. Isabella had gotten what she wanted. She had one. But standing alone in her empty house, she finally understood. Some victories weren't worth the cost.